Very few folks want to talk about the problem of black racism, which is unfortunately a pernicious force in American society. Indeed, my friends, I recently saw a video that struck me with terror and disgust. It is a video that I think every American, every person, whether they care about race or not, should see, so they can see precisely the kind of behavior that is being normalized and co-signed by the race radicals throughout the West. I will show this video to you, and then I will be back with my broader analysis. Watch.
Faggot ass Caribbeans back to them motherfucking take them back to Europe with y'all.
Yeah, me too.
Gay ass weird Caribbean African shit's annoying. Fucking gay ass gorilla looking. Shut up, your ugly body. Nasty ass mutating, permutating, corrugating, medium-laden skin. Shut up, your body don't even last long enough. I'm gonna look younger than him by the time he's my age. I don't care about them ugly ass kids in your race. Shut up.
89?
Fucking plastic ass body.
86?
Little debilitated, enervated, emasculated, feeble, incapacitated, indisposed, emaciating, attenuating, tenuous body. I don't care about you. Shut up, you white monkey.
Okay.
You a dog in this country. You're a fucking dog. You're nothing over here. You are a dog. Shut up. I'm Black American. I'm over you.
Now, I made a tweet about this video, which as of the posting of this video, has well over 3,000 likes, almost 4,000 likes, in which I say that racism is condemnable, whether it's against black people or whether it's against Caucasians, white people, and that every man of good conscience should stand against it regardless. But I also said in that tweet that the framing around race in our current political discussion, the framing done by people like Ibram X. Kendi, like Robin DiAngelo, like Kimberly Crenshaw, all of these people who are the heads of the race industrial complex, their framing is epistemically unsound, and it leads to certain situations that are antagonistic towards certain groups in society, particularly, in this case, white people. Now, upon making this statement, I was told by several apologists for the unwise framing that I shall discuss in a second, that I am taking a single instance from a mentally insane man, a mentally disturbed man, and I'm blowing it out of proportion by extrapolating it to the broader population. To that I say a few things. Number one, it would be indeed unwise to take this single instance and try to proscribe a general state or condition in society from it. That would be what we call in logic anecdotal evidence, which is not always reflective of a general culture. Having said that, if the general culture and the general trend is going towards the direction of an anecdote, then that anecdote should be taken as evidence of the general trend and not merely an isolated incident. The general trend, as produced by the framing that Kendi and company have done around race, is antagonism and hatred towards white Americans, and, secondarily, towards Asian Americans. We'll discuss that part in a second. But the primary target for people who have framed the current conversation around race has been white Americans. You don't believe me? Several institutions in America, from universities to museums, have been using the term whiteness to describe and to understand what racism truly is. The Smithsonian Institute has on their, it's one of the most well-known museums in the world, has on their website an article titled Whiteness, in which they say whiteness and white racialized identity refer to the way that white people, their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all groups are compared. They go on to say, whiteness is also at the core of understanding race in America. This is the catch. We're getting somewhere. They continue, whiteness and the normalization of white racial identity throughout America's history have created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior or abnormal. They continue, the white dominant culture operates as a social mechanism that grants advantages to white people since they can navigate society both by feeling normal and being viewed as normal. Persons who identify as white rarely have to think about their racial identity because they live within a culture where whiteness has been normalized. This perspective is reflective of the perspective of contemporary leftist thought on race. And this perspective is reflected in the various diversity, equity, and inclusion, which in my opinion is a misnomer. It is a phrase that contains words that have been tainted by people with bad intentions. It's a reflection of the content of many diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in America. It's a reflection of what is going on at universities. So, for example, there was a college dean at Texas State University who wanted students to take a class called Public Education and Multicultural Society. And in that class, the students were expected to complete, and I'm reading from an article here, 3 graded assignments that center on whiteness, at least one involving critiquing its relationship to privilege. It further asked students to consider several key terms: whiteness, race, privilege, prejudice, and discrimination. This continues. We can go all across the country. Just this year in January, in Oregon, a sociologist who teaches at Willamette University hosted a seminar at a local library called Working on Whiteness, where participants were asked the following questions. Quote, how can we who are white show up as more effective and less damaging participants in the struggles to interrupt racism in our community? How can white people engage in efforts to dismantle racism in ways that do not reproduce or place unfair burdens upon people of color to be our teachers? And the work, I'm quoting the article, that white people must focus on includes taking responsibility for one another, educating ourselves, and coming to the view of white people as our partners, not competition, in developing anti-racist identity. Several universities throughout America, University of Chicago, one of the most eminent universities in the world, a so-called public Ivy, Arizona State University, University of Wisconsin-Madison, all have had or have a class called The Problem of Whiteness, in which one of the professors, the one at University of Wisconsin-Madison, said, whites rarely or never question what it is to be white. So you go through life taking it for granted without ever questioning or critically interrogating it. At the University of Chicago, Daniel Schmidt, a sophomore there, who was a sophomore at the time of his exposed the class, The Problem of Whiteness, which has a similar kind of description. That same professor goes on to say, the idea of talking about the problem of whiteness is to turn the question back to where it belongs. The problem of racism is the problem of whites being racist towards blacks. This is the current epistemic frame, the current cultural conception of what it means to be racist. The idea that only a single group, the dominant group, i.e. white people, I'll address this in a second, have the ability to be racist because they allegedly possess the most power and influence in society. This is the framing. Therefore, that heathen that was shown in the video shouting slurs towards the innocent child in the video and the 2 white parents would not be seen as racist because he is not being seen as an individual doing something, because racism, according to the current framing, has changed from an individual behavior to an institutional or social or systemic behavior. And therefore, if the people in power over the system don't bear the characteristics of other people, the minorities, then that's how we evaluate racism. The man in the video wouldn't be called a racist under the current woke framing because he allegedly lacks power. I can continue with this, with providing more and more evidence of this antagonism towards white folks being a problem. At Arizona State University, a story that I covered a few years ago when this happened, there were white students who were bullied out of the Multiculturalism Center, and the students who bullied them out of the center said they were making this space uncomfortable, and they followed up by saying, but you're white. Do you understand what a multicultural space is? White is not a culture. This white man thinks he can take up our space, and this is why we need a multicultural space, because they think they can get away with this stuff. The argument was they're not centering whiteness. At another college, the University of Virginia, there was a statement made by a student that it is far too white and minorities need their own spaces. There have been incidences of teams and groups and retreats being race-based where only people of color are allowed. What is my point? Why am I reading off all of these things? Because we must understand, this is not merely an isolated incident of some crazy guy on the subway screaming at people. This is a deeper cultural rot which reflects certain values and reflects a certain idea of truth and knowledge that must be confronted and must be uprooted. And that is why black individuals who speak in this language, black individuals who see racism in this way, are excused for behaviors, actions, and claims that are clearly racist and would have been called racist 50, 60, 70 years ago because they are allegedly taking back what was taken from them. Well, I call bogus. I say that idea is absolutely bogus. And that idea will be the undoing of Western civilization if it is continually aided and abetted by the institutions meant to keep our society together. When the founders framed the Constitution, they understood that a virtuous people would be the quality upon which a republic subsists. Without virtue, a republic cannot exist. In the institutions in society, the non-governmental institutions will be the ones to keep that virtue alive. But today, these same institutions have no knowledge or care for virtue because they have been hijacked by ideologies that are antithetical toward the virtue. The problem with the contemporary framing around race is multidimensional. It is multifaceted. But the primary problem is this. This framing reduces racism to abstract categories as opposed to recognizing the role individuals play in society. You can't talk about systems without talking about behavior. You can't talk about behavior without talking about society. And you can't talk about society without talking about individuals. Beneath every society, there is an individual. Without individuals, society does not exist. But instead of recognizing this symbiotic, necessary relationship, this sort of domino-like relationship between the individual, society, and systems and institutions, the woke narrative puts the focus squarely on institutions and squarely on people as members of collectives and not individuals in their own right. And by doing this, it completely misses the significance of understanding concepts like racism. Racism is not a behavior undertaken by institutions. It is a behavior undertaken by individuals who then use institutions or whatever as tools to execute that behavior. And this predatory framing that racism, according to Ibn X. Kendi, is prejudice plus power, which produces specifically disparate outcomes, is another example of the anti-intellectual, epistemically dangerous path we are taking in society, because disparate outcomes, as people like Thomas Sowell mentioned many years ago before I was even born, can be produced by many variables. And not only that, but power, this is my argument here, is a morally neutral tool. Power is not this thing that has any value to it. Power is what is guided by values. If I have power and if someone else has power, we're going to do two different things with those power, with those acts of power. They won't be the same. And yet, the woke, the people who frame racism in this way, treat power as if that has some kind of moral value and as if it has the legitimacy to produce certain outcomes, as if it has the right to produce certain outcomes. And this is what equity is. Equity is the use of power to produce outcomes that you believe are advantageous to abstract groups. Which again, we don't live in a reality where abstract groups exist. We live in a reality where individuals exist. So the false framing produces false policies which feed false notions, which then harm the fabric of reality. An illusion, a lie, a falsehood, all of these things cannot coexist next to truth. You either believe the truth or you believe a lie. You cannot do both. And if you try to do both, if you try to compromise with these kind of ideologies, you will get nothing more than disharmony, discord, and chaos. And that's what's happening in our society. It's chaotic. The problem of black racism is summed up neatly by the fact that this predatory framing, this abuse of knowledge, this destruction of reality, this destruction of human reason has been used to justify behaviors that would otherwise be condemned if it had happened to any other race. Behaviors that minorities can now, under this framing, undertake. That is the danger. And that is why I think what happened on that subway was even more predatory than we can even imagine. Not because it was some insane, crazy man saying it, because there is an entire part of the country that believes that that insane, crazy man does not have the ability to be racist, because he doesn't belong to an abstract category that has power in society. We must condemn behavior, but in order to condemn certain kinds of behavior that are bad, we have to understand what category, what nature that behavior is of. And if we don't understand that, how can we condemn it? We will be condemning an illusion, a falsehood, a misdirection. And that's what this framing is. This framing is entirely a misdirection. It's a misdirection which keeps us away from actually achieving racial harmony in America. The solution to all of this that I have mentioned is not to endorse racial collectivism. There are many people that believe that endorsing racial collectivism and defending the white race or whatever race that is being harmed by these ideologies is the solution. The solution is to reject racial collectivism and embrace the colorblind ethos. The solution is to say that the individual human being, our value does not come from our appearance, does not come from our social status. Our value comes from our fundamental existence as rational souls operating in a world that we can understand and ascertain and operate in through our ability to think. But this predatory framing requires you not to think. This predatory framing requires you to submit that all social relations are reduced to power dynamics. This predatory framing requires you to submit to ideas that do not comport with the truth. And for that reason, my friends, the problem of black racism will always be a social impediment to racial harmony, because that problem is fed by these ideas that would seek to justify it. Now, am I saying that people who believe in anti-racism would say that man in the video was not wrong for what he did? I'm sure many of them would condemn it, but not on the proper grounds. Many of them would say he's a bigot as opposed to a racist, and that's the problem. Bigotry as a general descriptor does not describe or capture the extent of what happened on that train. And nor does it actually diagnose the issue permeating through society. When you can have universities like Rutgers University publish books about how white men on campus are problems, which they did. They published a book on that. It's called White Guys on Campus. And no one bats an eye. You have a serious cultural illness. When you can have students at school newspapers writing articles about how, say, white males need to be taken care of. This happened at Yale University. There's a serious problem that the word bigotry just can't describe fully. When you have people claiming that you can only understand racism by understanding power, that's a problem, because it's a misdirection from the truth. When you have people who have no problem excluding someone from a space on the basis of their skin tone, that's a serious problem that cannot be captured by the word bigotry. We have to be radical in our willingness to assert the truth and our willingness to understand what's going on here. We have to be radical in our rejection of these ideas. And we must be willing and courageous to assign things to what they are, not what we wish them to be. Racism is not prejudice plus power. Racism is an intent, a statement of value that is based on collectivist understandings of people. That's it. It is an intention, a statement of value based on a collectivist, i.e. false understanding of people. There's something exceptionally important to understand, which kind of ties into why I believe the Kendi and D'Angelo type framing around racism is so dangerous, is that society operates on a basic premise that every individual will pursue the principle of justice. The principle of justice operates on the idea that we have an obligation to abstain from certain things and to, in particular cases, do certain things. We have an obligation to abstain from harming someone in their property or possessions or their person. We have unless, of course, they give us just reason to do so by harming us in that. We have an obligation to abstain from defaulting on our contracts. You have an obligation to abstain from lying or defaming someone's name. These are all integral to the principle of justice. This is a necessary principle which allows society to stay afloat. If everyone began to just wantonly lie, steal, cheat, kill, society would be destroyed. And so that being the foundation of good society must also subsist upon a sound sort of ethical justification. Why is the principle of justice necessary? But if you believe that society is just a bunch of power games and power dynamics and institutions and class-based conflict and things that can be taken or won by abstract groups, you don't actually have the ability to recognize the principle of justice for what it is. This framing around race and racism, which does not recognize the individual sufficiently and therefore does not recognize the principle of justice, is essentially antisocial and will cut at the fabric of society and possibly destroy it if it remains powerful and unabated in our institutions. And ironically enough, Kendi, D'Angelo with her white fragility, all that kind of stuff, is based on a fundamentally false understanding of an entire group of people, of white people, who suffer at the hands of their casual, legitimized, and philosophically unsound racism. May all of us have the wisdom to reject it, and reject it strongly. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, be sure to subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video, join my Discord in the comment section down below, email me, interact with me. You know, I do these videos all the time, and I really like hearing from you. But until next time, my friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.